60 years ago, Sister Mary Catherine walked out of St. Joseph's Orphanage in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and vanished into the humid southern night, leaving behind 37 children who called her their guardian angel. The 34-year-old nun had dedicated 12 years of her life to caring for abandoned and orphaned children in one of the state's most impoverished parishes. On that fateful evening of September 15, 1964, she simply disappeared after evening prayers, taking nothing with her except the clothes on her back. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the bell. Here we reopen archived cases with respect and proof. The disappearance plunged the entire St. Joseph's community into tragedy and despair. Mother Superior Agnes described Sister Mary Catherine as the heart and soul of our mission, a woman who had never shown any signs of wanting to leave her calling. The children she cared for, many of whom had already been abandoned by their biological families, now faced yet another devastating loss. 7-year-old Thomas Miller, one of her favorite children, stopped speaking for 3 months after her disappearance. The orphanage staff noticed how the younger children would wait by the windows each evening, hoping to see their beloved sister walking up the gravel path. The local community was thrown into confusion and fear. In the conservative Catholic environment of 1960s Louisiana, a nun simply vanishing was unprecedented and scandalous. Whispers spread through the parish like wildfire. Some suggested she had lost her faith and fled to start a new life. Others feared something more sinister had occurred. The mystery deepened when her personal belongings were found untouched in her small quarters. Her prayer book open to Psalm 23, her rosary beads still warm on her nightstand, and a half-finished letter to her sister in Ohio sitting on her desk. The Baton Rouge Police Department initially treated the case as a missing person investigation, but their efforts were hampered by the era's limited investigative techniques and the Catholic Church's reluctance to cooperate fully. Detective Raymond Broussard, the lead investigator, later recalled how church officials seemed more concerned about protecting the institution's reputation than finding Sister Mary Catherine. The police considered several possibilities: voluntary disappearance, kidnapping, or worse. They interviewed staff members, searched the surrounding bayous, and followed every lead that came in from concerned parishioners. However, as weeks turned to months without any trace of the missing nun, the investigation gradually lost momentum. The case was eventually relegated to the cold case files, causing outrage among Sister Mary Catherine's family members who had traveled from Ohio to Louisiana demanding answers. Her younger brother, James Patterson, a World War II veteran, spent his life savings hiring private investigators and placing newspaper advertisements across the South, pleading for any information about his sister's whereabouts. The Patterson family never lost hope. James Patterson's daughter, Rebecca, inherited her father's determination after his death in 1998. She continued the search for her aunt, maintaining correspondence with law enforcement agencies and periodically visiting Louisiana to distribute flyers and interview elderly residents who might remember something from that September night in 1964. "My family was torn apart by not knowing," Rebecca would later say. "We needed closure. We needed to understand what happened to a woman who dedicated her life to helping others." The children of St. Joseph's Orphanage carried the trauma of Sister Mary Catherine's disappearance throughout their lives. Many of them, now elderly, still gathered annually on September 15th to pray for her safe return, or at minimum, for answers about her fate. Thomas Miller, the boy who stopped speaking after her disappearance, became a social worker dedicated to helping missing children. He often spoke about how Sister Mary Catherine's unexplained absence shaped his entire career and his understanding of loss and abandonment. As the decades passed, the case seemed destined to remain forever unsolved. The orphanage building fell into disrepair after closing in 1987, becoming a forgotten relic of Louisiana's Catholic history. Weeds grew through the chapel floor, rain leaked through broken windows, and the building stood as a haunting reminder of the mystery that had never been solved. The local diocese occasionally received inquiries about Sister Mary Catherine, but with no new evidence emerging, hope for resolution gradually faded into the Louisiana mist. Sister Mary Catherine Patterson was born Margaret Catherine Patterson on March 12, 1930, in Toledo, Ohio, to Irish immigrants who had fled poverty in search of the American dream. She was the eldest of 4 children in a devoutly Catholic family, where faith wasn't just practiced on Sundays but lived every day through acts of service and compassion. Her father, Patrick Patterson, worked double shifts at a steel mill to support his family, while her mother, Bridget, took in sewing to make ends meet. Despite their financial struggles, the Patterson household was filled with love, laughter, and an unwavering belief that God had a plan for each of their children. From an early age, Margaret showed an unusual sensitivity to the suffering of others. Her younger brother, James, would later recall how she would sneak food from their modest dinner table to give to homeless men who gathered near the railroad tracks. At age 8, she organized neighborhood children to collect blankets for families whose homes had been damaged in a devastating winter storm. Her mother often found her praying not just for her own family, but for all the lonely people in the world, a phrase that would become Margaret's trademark throughout her childhood. The calling to religious life came to Margaret during her senior year at St. Mary's High School. She had been volunteering at a local orphanage, reading stories to children whose parents had died in industrial accidents or had simply abandoned them during the Great Depression's lingering effects. One evening, while comforting a 6-year-old girl who cried herself to sleep every night, Margaret experienced what she later described as a divine revelation. "I felt God telling me that these children would be my children," she wrote in a letter to her parents, "not through marriage and birth, but through love and dedication." Her decision to enter religious life was met with mixed emotions by her family. While they admired her devotion, they worried about the sacrifices she would make. Her father had dreamed of walking her down the aisle at a traditional wedding, and her mother had hoped for grandchildren to spoil. However, when they saw the peace and determination in their daughter's eyes, they knew they couldn't stand in the way of what they believed was God's calling for her life. In 1948, at age 18, Margaret entered the convent of the Sisters of Charity in Cincinnati, Ohio. The transition from her warm, boisterous family home to the quiet, disciplined life of a novice nun was challenging. She struggled with homesickness and doubts about whether she was truly cut out for religious life. Her letters home during this period reveal a young woman wrestling with profound questions about faith, sacrifice, and purpose. "Some nights I wonder if I'm strong enough for this life," she wrote to her brother James. "But then I remember those children's faces, and I know this is where I belong." After taking her final vows in 1952 and receiving the religious name Sister Mary Catherine, she was assigned to various Catholic institutions across the Midwest. She taught at schools in Indiana and Illinois, always gravitating toward the most challenging students, those who had been labeled as troublemakers or lost causes. Her supervisors noted her exceptional ability to connect with children who had experienced trauma and abandonment. She had an almost mystical gift for seeing past behavioral problems to the wounded hearts beneath. In 1959, the opportunity arose for Sister Mary Catherine to transfer to St. Joseph's Orphanage in Louisiana. The facility, which housed nearly 40 children ranging in age from infants to teenagers, was struggling with understaffing and limited resources. The humid Louisiana climate, the cultural differences, and the overwhelming needs of the children might have daunted another nun, but Sister Mary Catherine saw it as exactly where God wanted her to be. "I feel like I've finally come home," she wrote to her family after her first month in Baton Rouge. Under her influence, St. Joseph's Orphanage transformed from a simple housing facility into a genuine home. She organized birthday celebrations for children who had never had parties, created a small library where she read stories every evening, and established a vegetable garden where the older children could learn responsibility while growing food for the community. Most importantly, she made each child feel seen and valued. She remembered every child's favorite color, their fears, their dreams, and their personal history. Her impact extended beyond the orphanage walls. She organized food drives for struggling families in the parish, volunteered at the local hospital, and advocated for better conditions at other institutional facilities throughout Louisiana. Local newspapers occasionally featured her work, describing her as an angel walking among us and a beacon of hope in our community. However, those who knew her best understood that beneath her serene exterior was a woman carrying heavy burdens, the weight of so many children's trauma, and the constant struggle against a system that often failed the most vulnerable. September 15, 1964, began like any other day at St. Joseph's Orphanage. Sister Mary Catherine rose at 5:30 a.m. for morning prayers, led the children through breakfast, and supervised their daily activities with the same gentle firmness that had made her beloved by every child under her care. The Louisiana heat was particularly oppressive that day, with humidity hanging in the air like a suffocating blanket. But Sister Mary Catherine moved through her duties with characteristic grace and patience. The day held special significance because it marked the 5th anniversary of her arrival at St. Joseph's. Several children had made small gifts for her, hand-drawn pictures, pressed flowers, and a poem written by 12-year-old Sarah Jenkins that read, "Sister Mary is our light, she keeps away the scary night." During the afternoon, Mother Superior Agnes had privately thanked her for her dedication, noting how dramatically the orphanage had improved under her influence. "The children don't just survive here anymore," Mother Superior had observed. "They thrive because of your love." Evening prayers proceeded normally at 7:30 p.m. Sister Mary Catherine led the children through their nightly routine of reflection and gratitude, helping the youngest ones with their prayers, while ensuring the teenagers participated respectfully. Witnesses later recalled that she seemed perfectly normal during this time, perhaps slightly more contemplative than usual, but showing no signs of distress or unusual behavior. 10-year-old Michael Rodriguez, who sat next to her during prayers, remembered that she held his hand a little longer than usual when she whispered, "God bless you, sweet child." After the children were settled in their dormitories by 8:45 p.m., Sister Mary Catherine followed her customary routine of checking on each child individually. This nightly ritual was sacred to her. She would stop at each bed, offer a gentle word of encouragement, and ensure that every child felt secure before sleep. The younger children especially looked forward to this moment, when she would smooth their hair and whisper personalized blessings. "Sleep with the angels, little one," was her standard farewell, spoken with such genuine love that even the most troubled children found peace. By 9:15 p.m., all the children were quiet, and Sister Mary Catherine returned to the main building for the final prayers of the day with her fellow sisters. The small religious community at St. Joseph's consisted of only 4 nuns, and their evening prayers were intimate affairs held in the chapel adjacent to the main building. Sister Mary Catherine participated normally, reading from the Book of Psalms and joining in the traditional hymns that ended their daily worship. Sister Margaret Ann, who sat beside her, later testified that everything seemed perfectly ordinary. The last confirmed sighting of Sister Mary Catherine occurred at approximately 9:45 p.m., when Sister Bernadette saw her walking toward the administrative building, supposedly to complete some paperwork before retiring to her quarters. This was not unusual behavior. Sister Mary Catherine often stayed up late handling correspondence with potential adoptive families or writing reports about the children's progress. Sister Bernadette called out a friendly good night, and Sister Mary Catherine turned to wave, offering her characteristic warm smile before disappearing into the building. Now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching us from and the exact time you're hearing this story. We're interested to know how far and at what moments of the day or night these documented accounts reach. What happened next remains one of the most baffling mysteries in Louisiana's religious history. When Sister Mary Catherine failed to appear for morning prayers at 6 a.m. the following day, her absence was initially attributed to illness. However, when Sister Bernadette went to check on her at 6:30 a.m., she discovered that Sister Mary Catherine's bed had not been slept in. Her nightclothes lay folded on the chair exactly as she had left them the previous morning, and her prayer book remained open on her bedside table to Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The search began immediately, but revealed disturbing inconsistencies. Sister Mary Catherine's outdoor shoes were missing, suggesting she had left the building intentionally. However, her winter coat remained in her wardrobe despite the cool September evening. Most puzzling was the discovery of a half-written letter on her desk, addressed to her brother James in Ohio. The letter began cheerfully, discussing the children's recent activities and her plans for the upcoming Harvest Festival, but it ended mid-sentence with the words, "I must tell you something important about." The pen lay beside the unfinished sentence, as if she had been interrupted suddenly. Mother Superior Agnes immediately contacted the local police and the diocese headquarters in New Orleans. The response was swift but chaotic. Police officers arrived within an hour, but their investigation was hampered by the religious community's unfamiliarity with criminal procedures and their natural inclination to protect the orphanage's reputation. The children, who had discovered Sister Mary Catherine's absence when she failed to appear for morning prayers, became increasingly agitated and fearful. Several of the youngest began crying inconsolably, and the older children peppered the adults with questions that no one could answer. As word of the disappearance spread throughout the local parish and beyond, theories began to multiply. Some suggested that Sister Mary Catherine had experienced a crisis of faith and chosen to abandon her religious vows. Others whispered about possible romantic entanglements, though those who knew her best dismissed such speculation as impossible. More sinister theories emerged as well: kidnapping by someone who had targeted the orphanage, or worse. The mystery deepened when a thorough search of the building and grounds revealed no signs of struggle, no indication of forced entry, and no evidence of where Sister Mary Catherine might have gone. Detective Raymond Broussard of the Baton Rouge Police Department arrived at St. Joseph's Orphanage on the morning of September 16, 1964, expecting to handle what he assumed would be a straightforward missing person case. A veteran of 15 years on the force, Broussard had dealt with runaways, domestic disputes, and the occasional kidnapping, but nothing had prepared him for the unique challenges of investigating the disappearance of a Catholic nun from a religious institution. The case would become the most frustrating and haunting investigation of his 30-year career. The initial crime scene examination revealed a puzzle that seemed to defy logical explanation. Sister Mary Catherine's quarters were pristine, with no signs of struggle or hasty departure. Her personal belongings remained untouched: rosary beads, prayer books, a small collection of letters from her family, and photographs of children she had cared for over the years. Most intriguingly, a substantial amount of cash, approximately $340, lay in an envelope in her desk drawer. This money, collected from various charitable donations, was earmarked for purchasing winter clothing for the children. The fact that she had left it behind strongly suggested that her departure was not voluntary. Detective Broussard's first challenge came from the Catholic Church hierarchy's reluctance to cooperate fully with the investigation. Bishop Theodore Morrison, who oversaw the diocese's operations, expressed concern about scandal and requested that the investigation be conducted with appropriate discretion to protect the sanctity of our religious institutions. This diplomatic language translated into restricted access to church records, limited interviews with religious personnel, and subtle pressure to avoid publicity that might damage the church's reputation in the conservative Louisiana community. The detective began by interviewing each of the 4 nuns who lived at St. Joseph's, but their testimonies provided few useful leads. Sister Bernadette, Sister Margaret Ann, and Mother Superior Agnes all described Sister Mary Catherine as devoted, stable, and showing no signs of distress or desire to leave her religious calling. They acknowledged that she had seemed slightly more contemplative in recent weeks, but attributed this to her naturally introspective personality and the approaching anniversary of her arrival at the orphanage. None could recall any unusual visitors, threatening correspondence, or concerning incidents that might explain her disappearance. Interviewing the 37 children presented its own challenges. Many were too young to provide reliable testimony, while others were too traumatized by Sister Mary Catherine's absence to speak coherently about the events leading up to her disappearance. However, several older children provided potentially significant information. 14-year-old Patricia Walsh mentioned that Sister Mary Catherine had received a telephone call around 8:00 p.m. on September 15th that seemed to upset her, though she couldn't recall specific details about the conversation. 16-year-old Robert Chen observed that Sister Mary Catherine had been spending more time than usual in the chapel during the week before her disappearance, often staying after evening prayers to pray alone. The investigation expanded to include Sister Mary Catherine's family members in Ohio. Her brother James Patterson traveled to Louisiana to assist with the search and provided Detective Broussard with valuable background information about his sister's character and history. James revealed that Sister Mary Catherine had never expressed doubts about her religious calling and had seemed genuinely happy in her letters home. He shared copies of her recent correspondence, which showed no indication of distress or plans to leave the orphanage. The unfinished letter found on her desk particularly troubled him because his sister was typically meticulous about completing her correspondence. Physical searches of the orphanage grounds and surrounding areas yielded no evidence. The Louisiana State Police assisted with searches of nearby bayous, wooded areas, and abandoned buildings, but found no trace of the missing nun. Bloodhounds were brought in to follow potential scent trails, but the humid Louisiana climate and the passage of time had eliminated any useful tracks. The search expanded to include bus stations, train depots and airports throughout the South, but no one reported seeing a woman matching Sister Mary Catherine's description. Detective Broussard pursued several promising leads that ultimately led nowhere. A report of a nun seen boarding a Greyhound bus in New Orleans turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. Another witness claimed to have seen Sister Mary Catherine at a diner in Mississippi, but the sighting couldn't be verified. The most intriguing lead came from a gas station attendant in Texas who reported serving a woman in religious clothing who seemed distressed and kept looking over her shoulder. But this lead also proved false when the witness failed to pick Sister Mary Catherine's photograph from a lineup. As weeks turned to months, the case grew increasingly cold. The media attention that initially focused on the disappearance gradually shifted to other stories, and public interest waned. Detective Broussard continued working the case, but with no new evidence emerging and pressure to focus on more recent crimes, the investigation effectively stalled. The detective's final report, filed in March 1965, concluded that Sister Mary Catherine Patterson had disappeared under mysterious circumstances with no evidence of foul play, voluntary departure, or accidental death. The failure to solve the case haunted Detective Broussard for the remainder of his career. In retirement, he often returned to the files, hoping to spot some overlooked clue or connection that might finally provide answers. He maintained contact with the Patterson family and periodically revisited St. Joseph's Orphanage to interview new staff members or follow up on tips from the public. "That nun's disappearance was like a ghost that followed me everywhere," he told a reporter in 1995. "I never stopped believing that somewhere out there was evidence that would explain what happened to her, but I never found it." The years following Sister Mary Catherine's disappearance transformed St. Joseph's Orphanage from a place of hope into a shadow of its former self. Without her organizing presence and nurturing spirit, the institution struggled to maintain the high standards of care that had made it a model facility in Louisiana. Staff turnover increased, funding became more difficult to secure, and the children, many of whom had already experienced abandonment before arriving at the orphanage, faced yet another devastating loss that would shape their understanding of trust and security for the rest of their lives. James Patterson, Sister Mary Catherine's younger brother, refused to accept that his sister had simply vanished without explanation. Using his savings from his job as a factory supervisor in Toledo, he traveled to Louisiana 4 times each year, conducting his own amateur investigation and keeping pressure on law enforcement to continue searching for answers. His dedication was both admirable and heartbreaking. A man who had lost his closest sibling and couldn't find peace without understanding what had happened to her. His wife, Dorothy, later recalled how the mystery consumed him, turning their dining room table into a command center covered with maps, photographs, and correspondence related to the case. The Patterson family's search efforts expanded beyond Louisiana's borders. James placed advertisements in newspapers across the South, offering a reward for information about his sister's whereabouts. He hired 3 different private investigators over the years, each of whom initially expressed confidence about solving the case, but ultimately reached the same dead end that had stymied police. The financial strain of these efforts forced James to take a second job and postpone his own children's college educations, but he never wavered in his determination to find his sister, or at least learn her fate. Meanwhile, the children who had been under Sister Mary Catherine's care struggled with the long-term effects of her unexplained absence. Child psychologists would later identify their experience as a form of complex trauma. Not only had they lost their primary caregiver, but the mystery surrounding her disappearance left them without the closure that comes from understanding loss. Many carried behavioral and emotional scars into their adult lives. Thomas Miller, who had stopped speaking for months after her disappearance, eventually became a social worker, but struggled with attachment issues and depression throughout his life. The Catholic Church's response to the ongoing mystery was characterized by what critics called benign neglect. While church officials never officially closed the case, they also made little effort to pursue new leads or maintain public awareness of Sister Mary Catherine's disappearance. The diocese's primary concern seemed to be managing potential scandal rather than finding answers. When journalists or family members requested access to church records or personnel files, they encountered bureaucratic obstacles and polite but firm refusals. This approach only deepened suspicions among some observers that the church might be concealing information about the case. As the 1970s progressed, St. Joseph's Orphanage faced increasing financial difficulties that paralleled broader changes in American approaches to child welfare. The rise of foster care systems and family preservation programs meant fewer children were placed in institutional settings, reducing both the need for and funding of traditional orphanages. By 1987, St. Joseph's housed only 12 children, and the diocese made the difficult decision to close the facility permanently. The building that had once echoed with the laughter and prayers of dozens of children fell silent, becoming a haunting monument to Sister Mary Catherine's memory. The orphanage's closure might have marked the final chapter in Sister Mary Catherine's story, but James Patterson's daughter, Rebecca, inherited her father's determination after his death from heart disease in 1998. A successful attorney in Cleveland, Rebecca had grown up hearing stories about her mysterious aunt and had absorbed her father's conviction that the truth was still discoverable. She modernized the search efforts by creating a website dedicated to Sister Mary Catherine's case, connecting with other cold case researchers, and utilizing emerging DNA database technologies that hadn't been available during the original investigation. Rebecca's efforts breathed new life into the decades-old case. She organized annual memorial services at the abandoned St. Joseph's Orphanage, bringing together former residents who shared memories of Sister Mary Catherine and kept hope alive for eventual resolution. These gatherings served both as healing rituals for those who had been affected by the disappearance and as opportunities to collect new information from people who might remember overlooked details. The events attracted local media attention and occasionally generated new tips, though none proved definitive. The development of internet technology in the 1990s and 2000s opened new possibilities for cold case research. Rebecca connected with amateur investigators, genealogy researchers, and other families dealing with long-term missing person cases. She learned about advances in forensic science, changes in police investigative techniques, and the growing movement to re-examine unsolved cases using modern methods. However, the passage of time had eliminated many potential witnesses and degraded physical evidence, making resolution increasingly unlikely with each passing year. Despite the challenges, certain individuals never gave up hope that Sister Mary Catherine's fate would eventually be revealed. Father Michael Thompson, who served as chaplain at St. Joseph's during the 1980s, often spoke about the need for closure not just for the Patterson family, but for the broader religious community that had been shaken by her unexplained disappearance. Local historians documented her story as part of Louisiana's Catholic heritage, ensuring that future generations would remember the devoted nun who had vanished without explanation while serving the most vulnerable members of society. The case became a symbol of larger issues within both law enforcement and religious institutions. The limitations of investigative techniques in the pre-digital era, the challenges of investigating cases involving religious organizations, and the long-term trauma experienced by communities when violent or mysterious crimes remain unsolved. Academic researchers studying missing person cases often cited Sister Mary Catherine's disappearance as an example of how the intersection of institutional protection, limited investigative resources, and family determination creates complex dynamics that can either help or hinder the search for truth. By the early 2000s, Sister Mary Catherine's disappearance had become part of Louisiana folklore, a cautionary tale whispered among religious communities and a source of fascination for true crime enthusiasts. The abandoned St. Joseph's Orphanage building, slowly deteriorating in the humid Louisiana climate, stood as a physical reminder of the unsolved mystery. The vandals had broken most of the windows, vines crept through cracks in the foundation, and the chapel where Sister Mary Catherine had led her final prayers was filled with debris and fallen plaster. Yet somehow, the building retained an aura of sanctity that deterred most trespassers and kept alive the memory of the woman who had dedicated her life to caring for forgotten children. The phone call that would finally crack open the 60-year-old mystery came on a humid Tuesday morning in July 2024. Rebecca Patterson Williams was reviewing legal briefs in her Cleveland law office when her assistant announced that Father Rodriguez from the Diocese of Baton Rouge was on the line with urgent news about her aunt. Rebecca's heart raced as she picked up the phone. After decades of false leads and disappointments, She had learned to temper her expectations, but something in Father Rodriguez's voice suggested this call was different from all the others. "Ms. Patterson-Williams," Father Rodriguez began, his voice trembling with excitement and reverence, "we've found something extraordinary at the old St. Joseph's building. During renovation work for the new community center, construction workers discovered letters hidden inside a Bible in the chapel. Letters written by your aunt, Sister Mary Catherine. Letters that explain everything. The renovation of the abandoned St. Joseph's Orphanage had begun 3 months earlier, as part of the diocese's initiative to convert historical church properties into community service centers. The project faced numerous challenges. Decades of neglect had left the building structurally unsound. Asbestos contamination required specialized removal, and the humid Louisiana climate had created extensive mold problems throughout the facility. However, the diocese was committed to honoring the building's history, while transforming it into a resource center for underprivileged families in the Baton Rouge area. Construction foreman Miguel Santos later described the moment of discovery as almost mystical. His crew had been removing damaged pews from the chapel when one of his workers, Elena Vargas, noticed that an ornate Bible on the altar appeared to be hollowed out. "She called me over to look at this old Bible, and when we opened it we found a stack of letters tied with a ribbon," Santos recalled. "The moment we realized what we had found, everything stopped. You could feel the presence of something sacred in that room." The letters, written in Sister Mary Catherine's distinctive handwriting and dated between August 1964 and September 15, 1964, revealed a story that no one had imagined. The first letter, addressed to whoever finds these words, began with a chilling confession. "I write these letters knowing that my time at St. Joseph's is coming to an end, not by my choice, but because I have discovered something so terrible that I cannot remain silent, and my silence is the only thing keeping the children safe. If this case has already gripped you, leave a like. It helps the story of Sister Mary Catherine reach more people." The subsequent letters detailed Sister Mary Catherine's growing awareness of systematic abuse occurring within the orphanage, perpetrated not by the religious staff, but by a network of wealthy benefactors who had been granted inappropriate access to the children in exchange for their substantial donations. The letters described her horror at discovering that several children had been subjected to abuse during what were presented as special outings and educational opportunities with prominent community members. Sister Mary Catherine's letters revealed her desperate attempts to protect the children while gathering evidence of the abuse. She had begun documenting incidents, photographing unexplained injuries, and carefully recording the children's statements about their experiences during these supervised visits. However, her investigation had attracted the attention of those involved in the abuse network, and she had received increasingly threatening warnings to discontinue her inquiries and maintain silence about what she had observed. The most heartbreaking letter, dated September 10, 1964, described her realization that reporting the abuse through official channels would likely result in retaliation against the children and potentially the closure of St. Joseph's, leaving 37 vulnerable children without any protection whatsoever. "I am trapped between my duty to protect these innocent souls and my obligation to expose the evil that surrounds them," she wrote. "If I speak, they will destroy the orphanage and scatter the children to places where I cannot watch over them. If I remain silent, the abuse continues, and I become complicit in their suffering." The final letter, written on September 15, 1964, the day of her disappearance, contained the most shocking revelations of all. Sister Mary Catherine had discovered that one of the abuse perpetrators was planning to escalate his activities and had specifically targeted several of the younger children for more serious harm. She had made the agonizing decision to confront the individual directly, hoping to stop the planned abuse through personal intervention and the threat of exposure. "Tonight I go to meet with the devil himself," she wrote. "I carry with me the evidence I have gathered and the hope that God will give me the strength to protect his children. If something happens to me, know that I died trying to save the innocents under my care." The letters also contained detailed information that had never emerged during the original investigation. Sister Mary Catherine had identified specific individuals involved in the abuse network, including a prominent local businessman, a city council member, and a respected doctor who served on the orphanage's board of directors. She had documented their methods of gaining access to children, their techniques for maintaining silence, and their use of financial donations to the church as leverage for continued access to potential victims. Perhaps most significantly, the letters revealed that Sister Mary Catherine had hidden additional evidence throughout the orphanage building, photographs, documents, and recorded statements that she hoped would eventually be discovered and used to bring the perpetrators to justice. "I have scattered the truth like seeds throughout this sacred place," she wrote. "Someday, when the soil is ready, these seeds will grow into a tree of justice that will shelter all the children who have suffered in silence." The discovery of these letters immediately transformed the investigation from a simple missing person case into a complex criminal matter involving historical child abuse, conspiracy, and likely murder. The Baton Rouge Police Department, now equipped with modern investigative techniques and a deeper understanding of institutional abuse patterns, reopened the case with renewed vigor and resources that had not been available in 1964. The revelation contained in Sister Mary Catherine's hidden letters sent shockwaves through the Louisiana law enforcement community and beyond. Detective Sarah Mitchell, a specialist in cold cases and historical abuse investigations, was assigned to lead the renewed investigation. With 20 years of experience examining institutional abuse cases, Detective Mitchell understood that Sister Mary Catherine's letters represented just the beginning of what would likely prove to be a complex web of criminal activity, cover-ups, and institutional failures that had remained hidden for 6 decades. The first challenge facing the investigation team was verifying the authenticity of the letters and determining whether the individuals named by Sister Mary Catherine could still be held accountable for their alleged crimes. Forensic handwriting analysis confirmed that the letters were genuine, written in Sister Mary Catherine's distinctive script on paper and with ink consistent with materials available in 1964. More importantly, several of the specific details mentioned in the letters were corroborated by information in the original police files that had never been made public, lending additional credibility to Sister Mary Catherine's accounts. Detective Mitchell's team began the painstaking process of locating and interviewing the surviving children from St. Joseph's Orphanage. Many were now in their 60s and 70s, scattered across the country, and some initially reluctant to revisit traumatic memories from their childhoods. However, as word spread about the discovery of Sister Mary Catherine's letters, several former residents came forward voluntarily, expressing relief that someone was finally investigating the experiences they had been too frightened or ashamed to discuss for decades. The interviews with former St. Joseph's residents revealed a pattern of abuse that closely matched Sister Mary Catherine's descriptions. Patricia Walsh, now Patricia Coleman, and a retired teacher in Texas, confirmed that she had been among the children subjected to inappropriate contact during so-called educational outings. Sister Mary Catherine noticed changes in my behavior and tried to ask me gentle questions about what happened during those trips, Patricia recalled through tears. I was too scared to tell her the truth, but she knew something was wrong. She started making sure I was never alone with visitors after that. Thomas Miller, the boy who had stopped speaking after Sister Mary Catherine's disappearance, provided some of the most compelling testimony. Now a successful social worker in California, Thomas revealed that he had witnessed Sister Mary Catherine confronting one of the alleged perpetrators just days before her disappearance. I was hiding in the supply closet when I heard Sister Mary Catherine talking to Mr. Beauregard in very stern tones, Thomas testified. She was telling him that she knew what he had been doing to the children and that it had to stop immediately. He laughed and told her that no one would believe a nun over him and that speaking up would only hurt the children more. The investigation into Edmund Beauregard, the prominent businessman named in Sister Mary Catherine's letters, revealed a disturbing pattern of charitable involvement that provided access to vulnerable children. Beauregard had served on the boards of directors for multiple children's institutions throughout Louisiana and had been recognized publicly for his generous financial contributions to Catholic charities. However, the investigation uncovered evidence suggesting that his philanthropy was a calculated strategy for gaining trust and access to potential victims. Detective Mitchell's team discovered that Beauregard had died in 1987, but his extensive personal papers, donated to the Louisiana State Archives by his family, contained materials that supported Sister Mary Catherine's allegations. Among his correspondence were letters from church officials expressing concern about his special interest in spending time alone with children, as well as financial records showing that his donations to St. Joseph's had increased dramatically during the period when Sister Mary Catherine documented the abuse. The investigation expanded to examine the roles of other individuals named in Sister Mary Catherine's letters. Dr. Harrison Thibodeau, who had served on St. Joseph's medical board, was found to have been the subject of several complaints to medical authorities about inappropriate conduct with young patients, though no formal charges had ever been filed. City Councilman Robert Landry had used his political connections to arrange special access to the orphanage for his associates, ostensibly for mentorship programs that were never properly supervised or documented. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that several church officials had been aware of concerns about these individuals but had chosen to prioritize financial donations over child safety. Internal church correspondence, uncovered through court orders, revealed discussions about managing delicate situations involving major benefactors and the need to avoid scandal that might damage the church's reputation and financial stability. The investigation team also followed Sister Mary Catherine's clues about additional evidence hidden throughout the St. Joseph's building. Using ground-penetrating radar and specialized search techniques, investigators discovered a metal box buried beneath the chapel floor containing photographs, documents, and audio recordings that Sister Mary Catherine had made secretly. The photographs showed physical evidence of abuse, while the audio recordings captured conversations between perpetrators discussing their activities and methods for maintaining secrecy. One of the most chilling discoveries was a recording of a phone conversation between Edmund Beauregard and an unidentified accomplice dated September 14, 1964, the day before Sister Mary Catherine's disappearance. In the conversation, Beauregard discussed his plans to silence the troublesome nun and warned that she knows too much and won't be reasonable about keeping quiet. The recording provided the first direct evidence that Sister Mary Catherine's disappearance was the result of foul play rather than voluntary departure or accident. The renewed investigation also benefited from advances in forensic science that had not been available in 1964. DNA analysis of evidence found at the scene, including hair and fiber samples that had been preserved in the original case files, yielded genetic profiles that could potentially be matched to suspects. Additionally, modern psychological profiling techniques helped investigators understand the behavioral patterns and motivations of historical abuse perpetrators. As the scope of the conspiracy became clear, Detective Mitchell realized that Sister Mary Catherine's disappearance was not an isolated incident, but part of a systematic effort to protect a network of influential individuals who had exploited their positions of trust and authority to abuse vulnerable children. The nun's dedication to protecting the children under her care had made her a threat that the perpetrators felt compelled to eliminate. The investigation revealed that Sister Mary Catherine had been extraordinarily brave in her final weeks, knowing that her life was in danger, but continuing to gather evidence and protect children despite the personal risk. Her letters showed that she had considered fleeing Louisiana to seek help from federal authorities, but had ultimately decided that leaving would expose the children to even greater harm. The breakthrough that finally solved the 60-year mystery came from an unexpected source, a deathbed confession recorded in 2019, but not discovered by authorities until after the revelation of Sister Mary Catherine's letters. Marcus Thibodeau, the son of Dr. Harrison Thibodeau and a former maintenance worker at St. Joseph's Orphanage, had been battling terminal cancer when he decided to unburden his conscience of a secret that had tormented him for 6 decades. In a video recording made by his daughter and submitted to police after his death in 2020, Marcus Thibodeau revealed that he had witnessed his father and Edmund Beauregard murder Sister Mary Catherine on the night of September 15, 1964. According to his confession, Sister Mary Catherine had arranged to meet with Beauregard in the orphanage chapel, believing she could convince him to stop the abuse through moral persuasion and the threat of exposure. However, the meeting was a trap designed to silence her permanently. Marcus, who was 17 years old at the time and working part-time at the orphanage to help support his family, had been cleaning equipment in a storage room adjacent to the chapel when he heard voices raised in argument. Peering through a crack in the door, he witnessed Sister Mary Catherine confronting both men with evidence of their crimes, including photographs and written statements from children. When she threatened to take her evidence to federal authorities, Beauregard became violent, striking her with a heavy brass candlestick from the altar. The young man's confession revealed that Sister Mary Catherine did not die immediately from the initial blow, but succumbed to her injuries over the course of several hours, while the two men debated what to do with her body. Marcus, paralyzed by fear and the realization that he was witnessing the murder of the woman who had shown him kindness and compassion during his time at the orphanage, remained hidden in the storage room throughout the night, afraid that revealing himself would result in his own death. According to Marcus's testimony, his father and Beauregard disposed of Sister Mary Catherine's body by transporting it to a remote location in the Louisiana bayou, where they weighted it down and submerged it in deep water that would make discovery unlikely. They then returned to the orphanage to stage the scene of her mysterious disappearance, removing any evidence that might indicate foul play and creating the impression that she had left voluntarily. The confession explained several puzzling aspects of the original investigation, including why Sister Mary Catherine's outdoor shoes were missing, but her coat remained behind. The perpetrators had needed to make it appear that she had left willingly, but had overlooked some details in their haste to cover up the crime. Marcus also revealed that his father had used his position as the orphanage's medical advisor to influence the police investigation, subtly steering it away from areas that might have uncovered evidence of the murder. Detective Mitchell's team used Marcus Thibodeau's confession to guide a renewed search of the bayou areas, where he claimed Sister Mary Catherine's body had been disposed of 60 years earlier. Using advanced underwater search equipment and forensic techniques, investigators were able to locate what they believed were Sister Mary Catherine's remains in a remote section of swampland approximately 30 miles from St. Joseph's Orphanage. The recovery operation took several days and required specialized equipment to extract the remains from the muddy bayou bottom where they had been concealed for 6 decades. Forensic analysis confirmed that the skeletal remains were consistent with a woman of Sister Mary Catherine's age and physical description, and dental records provided definitive identification. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with Marcus Thibodeau's description of the brass candlestick attack. The discovery of Sister Mary Catherine's remains provided the closure that her family had sought for 60 years, but it also opened new questions about the extent of the cover-up and the number of people who had knowledge of the crime. The investigation revealed that several church officials and community leaders had suspected the truth about Sister Mary Catherine's disappearance, but had chosen to remain silent rather than confront powerful individuals who might retaliate against the institution. Rebecca Patterson Williams, Sister Mary Catherine's niece, traveled to Louisiana to witness the recovery of her aunt's remains and to participate in the final resolution of the case that had consumed her family for 3 generations. Seeing her finally brought home after all these years was both heartbreaking and healing, Rebecca said at a press conference. She died protecting children, and now the world knows the truth about her courage and sacrifice. The investigation also revealed that Sister Mary Catherine's murder had been part of a broader pattern of institutional abuse that extended beyond St. Joseph's Orphanage to other Catholic facilities throughout Louisiana. Her letters and hidden evidence documented a network of abuse that had victimized dozens of children over many years, with perpetrators using their wealth, influence, and charitable contributions to maintain access to victims while avoiding accountability. While the primary perpetrators of Sister Mary Catherine's murder had died decades earlier, the investigation led to criminal charges against several surviving individuals who had participated in the abuse network or the subsequent cover-up. Additionally, the Catholic Church faced renewed scrutiny about its historical handling of abuse allegations and its prioritization of institutional reputation over child protection. The case also prompted legislative changes in Louisiana's laws regarding historical abuse cases, extending statutes of limitations and creating new mechanisms for investigating institutional abuse that had been covered up or inadequately addressed by authorities. Sister Mary Catherine's sacrifice had ultimately led to systemic changes designed to better protect vulnerable children from similar predatory behavior. The final chapter in Sister Mary Catherine's story began with a funeral mass 60 years overdue. On a crisp October morning in 2024, hundreds of mourners gathered at St. Joseph's Cathedral in Baton Rouge to finally lay to rest the nun who had died protecting the children she loved. The ceremony brought together surviving former residents of St. Joseph's Orphanage, members of the Patterson family from Ohio, law enforcement officials who had worked on the case, and community members who had been touched by the story of her courage and sacrifice. Bishop Michael Thompson, who presided over the funeral service, acknowledged the Catholic Church's failures in the case while honoring Sister Mary Catherine's ultimate sacrifice. Sister Mary Catherine died as she lived, putting the welfare of children above her own safety, the bishop said in his homily. Her death was a tragedy, but her legacy is a testament to the power of moral courage in the face of evil. She chose to speak truth to power, even knowing the cost, because she believed that protecting innocent children was worth any personal sacrifice. The legal proceedings that followed the discovery of Sister Mary Catherine's remains resulted in unprecedented criminal charges and civil settlements. While the primary perpetrators of her murder were deceased, 3 surviving individuals were charged with conspiracy and accessory charges related to the cover-up of both the murder and the underlying abuse network. Additionally, the Catholic Diocese of Baton Rouge reached a $45 million settlement with survivors of the abuse that Sister Mary Catherine had tried to expose, acknowledging institutional failures that had enabled the crimes to continue. Thomas Miller, the boy who had stopped speaking after Sister Mary Catherine's disappearance and had later become a social worker dedicated to helping missing children, served as a pallbearer at her funeral. Now 70 years old, Thomas reflected on how Sister Mary Catherine's influence had shaped his entire life and career. "She saved me twice," he said. "First, by loving me when I was a scared little boy with nowhere else to turn, and second, by showing me that even when you're powerless, you can still choose to do what's right. Every child I've helped in my career has been helped because of what she taught me about courage and compassion." The Patterson family established the Sister Mary Catherine Foundation, dedicated to supporting organizations that investigate missing person cases and protect children from institutional abuse. The foundation provided funding for cold case investigations, supported families searching for missing relatives, and advocated for legislative changes to improve child protection systems. Rebecca Patterson Williams, who had inherited her father's determination to find answers, now channeled that same energy into ensuring that Sister Mary Catherine's legacy would help other families find closure and protect future victims. The abandoned St. Joseph's Orphanage building was transformed into the Sister Mary Catherine Community Center, serving underprivileged families in the Baton Rouge area with educational programs, counseling services, and support for at-risk youth. The chapel where she had held her final prayers and where she was ultimately murdered became a memorial garden, with a bronze statue depicting her reading to children and an inscription that read, "She chose love over silence, courage over safety, truth over comfort." The impact of Sister Mary Catherine's story extended far beyond Louisiana's borders. Her case became a catalyst for renewed efforts to investigate historical abuse cases within religious institutions, leading to the reopening of dozens of cold cases across the United States. Law enforcement agencies developed new protocols for handling cases involving institutional abuse, and victim advocacy organizations used her story to encourage survivors to come forward with their experiences. The children's advocacy community embraced Sister Mary Catherine as a symbol of the importance of believing and protecting vulnerable victims. Her willingness to challenge powerful perpetrators and institutions, even at the cost of her own life, inspired new generations of child protection workers, social workers, and law enforcement officers. Training programs for professionals working with at-risk children often included her story as an example of moral courage in the face of institutional pressure to remain silent. Academic researchers studying patterns of institutional abuse and cover-ups found in Sister Mary Catherine's case a compelling example of how individual conscience can challenge systemic failures. Her letters, preserved as historical documents, provided unprecedented insight into the decision-making process of someone who chose to confront powerful perpetrators despite knowing the personal risks involved. Her words became required reading in courses on ethics, social work, and criminal justice. The former residents of St. Joseph's Orphanage, many now grandparents themselves, continued to gather annually on September 15th, no longer to mourn Sister Mary Catherine's mysterious disappearance, but to celebrate her courage and remember the love she had shown them during their most vulnerable years. These reunions became healing gatherings where survivors could share their experiences, support one another, and honor the memory of the woman who had tried to protect them from harm. Patricia Coleman, formerly Patricia Walsh, spoke for many of the survivors when she said, "Sister Mary Catherine gave us the greatest gift anyone can give. She saw us as worthy of protection and love. Even when it cost her everything, she never stopped fighting for us. Knowing that she died trying to save us doesn't erase the pain of losing her, but it gives meaning to her death and purpose to our survival." The Catholic Church implemented new policies and procedures for handling abuse allegations, training programs for recognizing and reporting suspected abuse, and oversight mechanisms designed to prevent the institutional failures that had enabled Sister Mary Catherine's murder and the abuse she had tried to expose. While critics argued that these changes came decades too late, supporters viewed them as part of Sister Mary Catherine's lasting legacy, reforms that would help protect future generations of vulnerable children. As the sun set over the Louisiana bayou, where Sister Mary Catherine's remains had been hidden for 60 years, her story had come full circle from mystery to resolution, from silence to truth, from despair to justice. The nun who had disappeared trying to protect children had ultimately succeeded in her mission, even though it took 6 decades for the world to understand the full scope of her sacrifice and courage. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following the story of Sister Mary Catherine. We'll see you in the next video. In the quiet moments between day and night, when the Louisiana moss whispers secrets to the wind, the memory of Sister Mary Catherine Patterson lives on, not as a victim of tragedy, but as a testament to the power of love to triumph over evil, even when that triumph comes at the ultimate cost.